So today we are focused on Sage reporting. And now you may be aware that Sage offers a handful of different options for reporting. And as you may be aware, you can design reports within Sage using the built-in report designer. We can edit the reports that come with the system as well as design our own with the Sage report designer. You can also create and edit inquiries within Sage. Now, the benefit of an inquiry is that it provides that drill down capability that you may be looking for. We are able to see the specific information and seeing the details that are buried beneath those fields. We do also have the SAP Crystal reports, and using SAP Crystal reports, we can design reports that also feature those drill down capabilities. But if you're familiar with SAP Crystal, you know that it can be very time consuming to get those set up, and you need to understand where all of the data is residing before you start, and that can become very cumbersome. All three of these options will follow your Sage security. Now, you may be thinking Microsoft Access or Microsoft Query is another reporting option, but keep in mind that we cannot enforce Sage security with some of these different options. And with all of these options, you're going to need to learn both the reporting tool and you're going to need to learn your Sage database. So wouldn't it be advantageous if you could access your data through a familiar reporting platform, perhaps one that you're already familiar with? Well, with Sage Office Connector, we are going to unlock the power of Microsoft Excel to be used as your reporting engine. ERP systems such as 300 Construction and Real Estate are a great way to house your data in a secured system to allow you to perform several functions on that data while maintaining the integrity. Data is saved in relational databases on the tables that you see on the left-hand side of the screen here. So when you perform activities such as paying a bill or invoicing a customer, the data on these tables are updated accordingly. The data flow diagram on the right shows some of the Sage modules and how they interact with one another. So for example, if you look at the bottom half of that, you'll notice that the accounts receivable invoices can be generated from the billing module. And then when those accounts receivable invoices are paid on, it updates the general ledger accordingly. In my opinion, the real beauty of Sage 300 Construction and Real Estate lies within the flow of the relational database. When you run reports in Sage, you run queries against these tables to assemble that data as information. And these reports can come in many different flavors. Now, it's important to clarify what people think of when we talk about reporting in Microsoft Excel. When you run an inquiry in Sage, you do have the ability to export that data and then format it the way you'd like. However, that is not what we're talking about today when I talk about Excel-based reporting. The disadvantage of exporting an inquiry into Excel is that that data will be static, which means that if you ever wanted to refresh that data, you would need to start over. But with Sage Office Connector, we're essentially making Microsoft Excel a Sage technology, since we connect to our live Sage database and then simply need to refresh that data. So we are essentially creating a customized report that only needs to be created once, and then we're live refreshing that with data as needed. This slide will provide some context to the different pieces of Sage Office Connector. Office Connector does have several different pieces, and with Sage Office Connector, we can not only query the data into Microsoft Excel, but we can also use Excel as a data entry screen. We have the ability to write information directly into Sage tables utilizing Sage Office Connector. Office Connector can also be used to create import files that can be fed directly into Sage. There's also a financials portion of the solution, which allows us to run financial equations on our general ledger information. We host a variety of complimentary webcasts on each of these different topics, and I do have a pre-recorded webcast of each of them. Today we will be focusing on the query aspects of this solution. However, if you're interested in the write, import, or financials, we do also have those recordings available, so just put that request into the questions section and we'll be able to follow up accordingly. And with that introduction, let's go ahead and jump on into the software here today. What you guys are looking at currently should be a blank Excel workbook. You'll notice that I'm currently in the Add-ins tab of the solution here within Excel, and this is where Office Connector is going to reside. You'll see all of the different features and functions that are available for Office Connector once it's installed underneath the Add-ins tab. One other thing that I'll draw attention to will be the Office Connector Launchpad. And so when we launch Sage Office Connector, we have access to all of those templates right here on the Launchpad. You'll notice under the Welcome tab, we have lots of information regarding Office Connector, including product information, download updates, and all documentation that you will need to be successful with this tool. We can see what's been going on with Sage Office Connector, some recent updates, as well as some tutorials to help you get familiar with the tool if it's your first time using it. Here under the different tabs, we have some different templates that are available, and we'll be coming back to these here shortly. The first thing I'd like to showcase today will be the Sage Office Connector Query Designer, which essentially allows us to create something from nothing. To get started here, we'll go ahead and click into an empty cell, and we're going to use the Query Wizard to help us get started. With the Query Wizard, I've already logged in here today, but it will enforce your Sage security by having you log in to the particular user that you are within 300 CRE in order to enforce that Sage security. Here, you'll notice that we are met with a list of tables that are available within our Sage 300 construction and real estate system. If I wanted to run a query on invoices, on the accounts payable invoices, I would want to pull that from the AP invoice table. I could find that by typing in AP space I, and that'll bring me to AP invoice here. If I go ahead and click Next, I'll be presented with a list of records on this particular table. You'll notice that on an invoice, we have a vendor, we have an invoice number, description, status, and any other fields that you'd like to capture here in Excel. We'll go ahead and check those boxes off here. You can do so by just clicking the space bar on your keyboard. I could grab additional information, but this should be good for today's example. We'll go ahead and click Next. This window here is asking me if I'd like to condition the query that I'm going to pull in today. Otherwise, it's going to pull in every single invoice that I have within my 300 CRE system. I will be applying a condition, but I'll come right back to this in a moment. We'll go ahead and click Next here, and this is going to allow us to name that query and provide some additional options here. We would advise that you name your query something that you will remember it. So if you're running multiple queries, we can navigate between them fairly easily. I'll leave it with the default name here today, and then I will want to insert this table today with data that can be live refreshed. There are reasons why you would want to pull this in as static. However, one of the great benefits of Office Connector is the ability to refresh this with live data. We'll go ahead and click Finish here, and we're going to run that query, and it will pull in all of the invoices that I had recently queried. You'll notice here that this should be a very, very long list if you've been running invoices in your system for some time. And if I scroll down to the bottom here, you'll notice that I've got, 600 or so lines of invoices here. So if we wanted to condition this a step further, I don't want to see all 600 here. I just want to see those of a particular type. And let's say that I just want to see those that are from a particular vendor. Well, one thing we could do is we could enter parameters to help us tailor this data to find exactly what we're looking for. So for example, I could go ahead and type in vendor here and then say, I just want to see those invoices from vendor 100. So we will need to go ahead and modify that query that we created a moment ago. And one way to do that is to come here into the upper left-hand corner, and we can actually select that query here using this name box in the drop-down accordingly. We'll go ahead and now trigger the Office Connector Query Wizard once again, and that's going to bring us back to where we were before. I still want the AP invoice table, and I still want all the same records. However, now I'm going to apply a condition. When I click Add Condition here, we only want to see those invoices that pertain to a particular vendor. So I want that vendor to equal a value type. We could put in a literal value here or a database field, but alternatively, we could set that up as a parameter, and we can actually use the value within a cell here of Excel. I put that into B2, so we can put in the value here as $B, $2. The dollar signs are anchor fields for that. We'll go ahead and click OK, and now we've applied this condition. We'll go ahead and click Finish, and this should refresh and then tailor that down to just those invoices for vendor number 100. If we scroll down a bit, you'll see that I no longer have 600 lines, but rather 250 or so, or 260. I use this vendor a lot in other examples. But if we wanted to change that, we don't have to go back into the query wizard. We could simply come here and type in vendor 101. We could click the refresh, and that's going to refresh our Sage data and the query accordingly. So now we're going to be met with just those invoices for that vendor number 100. Now, since we're working in Excel here, and you could pass this off as a report to someone else, keep in mind that we can format this accordingly. So, for example, we could make that green, make sure it's bolded there. Perhaps you want to come under the View tab and take away grid lines for this, and make it a little bit more formal presentation. So let's go ahead and explore some of the other features that Sage Office Connector has. We do also have the ability to do lookups within Office Connector to look up values that might be on a different table within Sage. A common question that I get is, do we have the ability to run queries on multiple tables? And the answer is yes. And let me show you that. So if I were to go ahead and insert a column here, let's say in this second column for this, let's say we wanted to pull in the vendor name, because not everybody knows your vendor numbers. You may be familiar with it, but perhaps not everyone in your company. So what we can do is create a second column here within Excel and title that vendor name. So what we'll do here is a simple lookup to look up the vendor name for that vendor number. You can do that using the lookup wizard for Sage Office Connector, and it's asking us to select the table that we're interested in. Well, if you're familiar with the AP invoice table, you know that we don't actually have the vendor name on this table. We just have the vendor number. So we'll have to think of a table that might have the vendor name. And, one table that I know has it is the AP space V, the AP vendor table. If you wanted to preview that to see if those details were on that particular table, you can use the preview button here. And I can see that, yes, this has the vendor number. It also has the vendor name. So this table has what I'm looking for. So we'll go ahead and click Next. Now it's saying supply the key fields. Well, the key field here is the vendor number. So what we want to use is whatever value is in C5. So to do that, we can type in $C5. Again, that dollar sign is acting as an anchor field. We'll click Next here, and it's asking what would we like to look up? Well, based on that vendor number, I want you to return the name. We'll click Finish, and then notice how it added in alpha insulation here under my vendor name. We can simply double-click this cell and copy that down for all of the records. If I were to change the vendor number here to say 102 and refresh my query, you'll notice how it'll update the vendor number and the vendor name accordingly. So when we refresh there, notice how that updated. If somebody were to come in here and say delete some of these values, or say they came in here and deleted the rows entirely, it's not going to affect our query. We can simply refresh that data, and it's going to pull it in as if it pulled it in the first time from Sage. So I've shown how we can successfully create something from nothing using the Sage Office Connector Query Designer license. All right, so let's go ahead and transition over to some of those templates that are on the Launchpad. With Office Connector Launchpad, you'll be receiving some pre-built templates that will kind of take what I've shown you to the next level. I've already generated a handful of these workbooks down here below, and so the first one I wanted to show you is a payroll employee query. Now, for all of the templates on the Launchpad, we will be giving you an information tab, which will describe the purpose of this particular workbook. So, for example, this report provides a quick way to look up information about a specific employee. Now, we can also, some of these reports will also come with sample values that we can use just to kind of populate the details if we're playing around with this. But I could also come up here and enter an employee number such as 117 and then go ahead and refresh this information from the add-ins tab. You'll notice here that the employee 117 is Marshall Baranek, myself. I have myself set up within the system, and I can see some details pertaining to this employee. Perhaps we want to see all of the checks that are associated with this particular payroll employee. I don't have any in there for myself, but you'd have a list of all the checks that you've ever paid that employee readily available, or at least within this date range. And you could do that for any of your employees. That's just one example of a report that comes right out of the system when you purchase the solution. Another example is a list of your jobs. This particular report will pull all of our jobs, and as well as pulling in some details such as Google Maps or weather details. So using the address information on the job, we could click this here, and what that's going to do is go ahead and bring us out to a Google Maps to show us exactly where that job is located. So we can see here that if I were to zoom out, this particular job is right here in Beaverton, Oregon, not too far from our Sage location. We could use that for any of these, and that's simply using Microsoft Excel to put in a hyperlink to get to google.com and then put in the parameters for that job. So leveraging both your Sage data as well as the capabilities within Microsoft Excel to really provide process enhancements. Another one that I'd like to show here today is an AP vendor query. You guys watched me do an invoice query, but this is one here on our different vendors. If we come here, we can actually search for those vendors within our system. So say you're just looking for, A1 Electric Company, we could put in any search criteria here, and it'll just return those vendors as appropriate. Once we've located that vendor, we can see all open invoices here for that particular vendor, any paid invoices, and then any details on those particular invoices. We can use some sample values here to populate some of those details. And I'll go ahead and double click on this A1 Electric Company so we can see details on this particular company. Go ahead and refresh this. Here we can see those invoices that have been used to pay Beaverton Painting here. And we could go a step further here and seeing those paid invoices, all that we've paid Beaverton Painting there. And then we also have drill down capabilities that will give us details on those invoices. So right here next to this particular invoice number, you'll notice a little double caret thing on the right hand side, or chevrons, whatever you want to call those. If we do a double click on that, what it's going to do is pass the parameters over to the invoice details page to show us details pertaining to that invoice that we had paid for this vendor. So just another example of a Launchpad report to help you get information out of your Sage accounting solution. I did have one other report that I'd like to show, and that's a job cost cash flow analysis. Again, we'll come over to that sample values tab and use those sample values today. But when we refresh this data here, it'll first give us the option to log into a particular data folder, and then it'll populate that information based on those job details. I'm not sure if I'm going to get much information with my sample data here. I may need to change that. Yep, let me go ahead and do that real quick. Okay. And we'll leave this one 5/31/2015 and refresh. And then it'll refresh this accordingly. You'll be able to see all of the details by job here down below in the job details, as well as any cash flow trends. And this graphic here that you'll see in just a moment is simply leveraging the power of Microsoft Excel. We would highly recommend that you learn how to display the information appropriately once it's been pulled in. Depending on how much information you're pulling in, it can vary in terms of how long it takes for those queries to run. But here you can see a cash flow trend. Ideally, you wouldn't want to be in the red like this particular example, but I am just working with sample data here today. But looks like we're starting to turn it around here in April 15. That concept of the drill down that I had described earlier is also utilized in this report. You'll notice that all of these values here down below do have that ability to drill down. So for example, I could see this value here for March 2015 and double click, and that's going to go ahead and push that information over to this next tab, which will provide details pertaining to those transactions. We can take that a step further and double click here on the cash received amount to get all of the details buried underneath that. So we're effectively replicating that drill down capability that you may have in some of your Sage reports in Microsoft Excel.